morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Faith with me, your host, Dave Abbott. And you can find us on youtube.com/Wrestling with Faith UK. Also, you can DM me as well and find out more information on Twitter, now known as X, at Faith_Wrestling, and also on various Spotify podcasts as well. And also including anything that used to be on the artist formerly known as Anchor and Google and also Amazon Podcasts as well. And let's get straight into it. A guy who I've been chatting to on and off via email for many, many weeks now, and I'm very, very pleased to say he has taken the time out this afternoon to come on today's show. None other than wrestling commentator extraordinaire Joe Dombrowski. Joe, the most important question I'm going to ask you today, sir. How are you?
And that's often the most difficult question to answer because, you know, in my line of work, every day is different. Every day is a new adventure, and you never know what's going to come your way. But it's more often than not positive, and it's always fun. It's never boring. So I'm feeling good and happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. No, not at all. I mean, Joe, for me personally, I was inspired to reach out to you at the 1PW show that I attended to at the Doncaster Dome, which obviously you were there. I got to see you and meet you there as well. And let's just start at the very beginning, like we do with all great stories. Where did your love and fascination from wrestling come from? So, young Joe, trying to carve out his way in the world. How did it come about? Where did the love of wrestling come from?
I don't really know. I think wrestling just found me. My earliest memory is finding it on TV, and I believe it was a promo with Bobby Heenan and Andre the Giant, and something about that. I'm sure just the larger than life personalities. I'm sure the big lights and the bright colors and all of that. I mean, wrestling in 1991 and 1990 was so attractive and appealing to kids. Just everything that was done, it was meant to just draw you in on a Saturday morning. And it did it with me, and it grew. It was really the first thing I embraced as a love, a hobby, a collector, anything. And it went, from there to the VHS tapes and the magazines and the action figures, and it just continued to be a groundswell that built and built and built, and obviously it's defined my life to this point. So I don't know where I'd be or what I'd be doing if it wasn't for that. Kind of scary to think about. So I'm just glad that I was able to connect with it in the way that I have and find a path that has been so fruitful to me.
Yeah, praise God for that. I mean, you've been involved in a lot of the mainstream shows that we are blessed to watch over here in the UK and all over the world as well. I mean, but coming back to what you said about the wrestling in 90 to 91 as well, I mean, that's my era. You know, we'd go to school and it would be all about the controversial Royal Rumbles with Hulk Hogan, with Ric Flair, with Sid Justice, aka Sid Vicious, and The Undertaker, you know, and Money Inc. You know, there was so much out there in terms of larger than life personalities. I mean, you mentioned Andre, you mentioned Bobby the Brain as well. I mean, they were obviously key, a huge part of the fanfare, just the pantomime, the performing art of wrestling at the time. But there was so much else going on. I mean, we had really, really big tag teams like Legion of Doom, like the Rockers, the Nasty Boys, Demolition, etc., etc. And it was such, like you say, I mean, Vince McMahon, it was marketed well at its audience. And I don't think in terms of WWE, that's changed too much. But in terms of obviously going through, you grew up, obviously, we got the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars as well. We've got ECW and various aspects of wrestling. Did your sort of curiosity change, or was you very much a sort of still in that era of WWF as it was at the time, and that was your particular love of wrestling?
I mean, you always change and evolve. I had discovered ECW on local television probably around early 1997, late 1996, maybe something like that. So they had gained traction, they'd gained momentum. They were, more than just another company, but they still hadn't yet hit, pay-per-view or anything like that. WCW, I'd always watched kind of on the periphery. But to me as a fan, that was a distant number two because it just didn't have the same panache to it. It didn't have the same spectacle to it. And, as a kid, obviously you're going to be more drawn to, Ricky Steamboat breathing fire than Ricky Steamboat doing a wrist lock. Yeah. And, one show was good for one and one show was good for the other. You're gonna be drawn a lot more to the Berserker than you are to Barry Windham, and that's not a take or a knock on either man's skill. It's just a case of that's where my eyeballs went. And that's what appealed to me and what I understood more than some of the fine tuning and the fine art of the psychology that maybe WCW was more known for as kind of a workhorse like territory for at least a few years. When the NWO came along, obviously that piqued my interest, and they say a high tide raises all ships, and I think 96, 97 is my favorite year as a fan for this business of all time, because every promotion was strong, every promotion was on a creative upswing. And you had, Sting and Hogan on one channel. You had the brilliant storytelling of Brett and Shawn and Austin and Mick and all those guys on WWF. ECW, you had Terry Funk achieving his world title. You had the franchise. You had Taz. You had Sabu. So everybody was firing on all cylinders. And I think it was hard to be a fan in the mid 90s. It was very difficult to find things to be excited about. But once 96, 97 hit, and especially, once we get to 98, really amp things up, the business was red hot. And again, it was just perfect timing for me where as a 5-year-old, I found a brand of wrestling that was tailor-made for a 5-year-old. Now, as a 12-year-old, wrestling is almost shaping and molding itself to fit me more than I'm doing to it. And as I'm growing up and all my peers are growing up, now wrestling's becoming cool again for a completely different set of reasons than it was when I was a little kid.
Understand, totally agreed as well. I mean, and I think the industry, I think you probably agree as well, it had to evolve. It couldn't keep with the gimmicks and the gimmick matches all the time because it was only going to come so far. And something they really had to capture the zeitgeist of what was going on, the sort of post-grunge era, the sort of teenage angst, the sort of, the modern man, the modern woman, and the changing of that generation as well. And like you say, I think every industry every promotion at that time really captured something, because if you didn't have something that you liked on one, you could more than capable of finding it on another promotion to sort of suit that lust, whether it be the bloodthirsty lust of ECW, or like you say, the fantastic storytelling and the comedy elements of WWF storylines as well, and also, like you say, the complete career reinvention, which was, I personally think as a fan, if Hogan hadn't have done that heel turn, who knows where his career could have potentially stalled at that point. And that was great, bringing in all those ex-WWF guys as well as obviously the upcomers, like the Rey Mysterios coming into from ECW into WCW and the Jerichos as well. So, yeah, really, really good time. And all different styles of wrestling as well on show. Let's bring it back to you, though, Joe. I mean, you've been involved, color commentated a lot of what we know. I mean, TNA, now known as Impact Wrestling, which thankfully, yours truly has got a ticket for the Newcastle show in the UK this coming October. Ring of Honor, AAA as well, Lucha Libre, Jim Crockett Promotions, all these well-known ones coming up all the way to, obviously your involvement in WWE as well, and also MLW. How do you start to get into the career as a commentator, as a color commentator? How does that come from? I mean, was that initially the plan, or did it kind of spiral into that from your own thoughts about what you want to do in the world of wrestling?
Well, I knew I always wanted to be involved, and I knew I could always contribute on some level. I was just self-aware enough to know that that wasn't going to be an athletic sense. It wasn't going to be a physical sense. I never really had the coordination. I was never really a body guy. I know that may shock a lot of people, but it just wasn't something that I felt would have played into my gifts or my skill set, whatever they may be. I think whatever skills I have, they were more mental or verbal than physical. So once I started attending local shows and really diving into independent wrestling, I really got the itch. And I knew that I don't know how, I don't know when, but this is the way in. And it only took me 5 months to figure it out. And my first technical job in wrestling was a co-promoter because I was still in high school. I was in 11th grade, and I had middleman between my Spanish language teacher, which, I mean, that Spanish class has meant more to my career than I ever would have thought it was. But I middleman that teacher and the promoter of IWC Wrestling here in Pittsburgh to work together on a fundraiser because the Spanish class wanted to do a field trip. The wrestling promoter was always doing fundraisers and, charity events for schools, athletic clubs, charities, whatever the case is. So to me, it was a perfect marriage. And I was kind of that conduit in the middle where I would work the town, hang up posters, sell tickets, and be that liaison between both sides. And it was a big success. You have to understand that the town I live in, no wrestling comes here. No wrestling comes within 20 minutes of here because just this part of the right north of the city of Pittsburgh, it's considered kind of a dead area. There's really not a lot of great success with people that have run here attendance wise. But we had 350 people there without any television names and without any massive promotional budget. The biggest name we had on the show would go on to do television. You may have heard of him. His name is CM Punk. But at the time, CM Punk had just debuted in Ring of Honor. He was still miles away from WWE. So the draw was wrestling. And then we had 350 people there. Everybody was happy with it on both sides. And that was a way to get my foot in the door, writing for IWCWrestling.com, doing some more commentary fill-ins and just whatever I could here and there just to get an opportunity. And again, timing is everything. It was 7 months after that first show. The promoter had none of his regular announcers. He was very, very short-staffed. So I was next man up. I got the call. It was the first time I'd ever done a full show, start to finish, as a commentator. I'd done bits and pieces here and there. I'd done most of the show, that first show at my high school, but never done start to finish. But that was enough to where Norm Connors, the promoter, saw something in me and kept me around in that position because that's been my chair ever since 20 years later.
Wow, that is awesome. And like you say, timing is everything. It's a lot of things. A lot of people that I speak to through the podcast do say that, you just got to make yourself available. You've got to be there and make yourself available when these opportunities do come up. I mean, slight swerve from that as well. You obviously started delving into sort of digital marketing, digital content and DVDs. And one of the things, well, the first thing that you did, I believe, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, the Montreal theory. So obviously, you know, you're cutting your teeth in terms of what you want to do within the industry. Um, how did all that come about then? I mean, was that a collective idea? Was it an individual idea? Was it amongst friends or other people in the business? I mean, just talk us through that. Because obviously, for those who don't know, obviously it's about primarily the Montreal screw job. Was it or wasn't it? You know, and you know, was it a work? Was it a shoe? Was it a mixture of all? You know, and who was involved if it was? So how did all that come about? Because that is obviously one of the biggest, and always will be one of the biggest talking points in WWF history.
It was always a topic that fascinated me so much. If you were going to ask me my favorite rivalry to watch in wrestling, if you were going to give me a 6-hour compilation of any feud in wrestling history, and I could watch it now start to finish, which one would it be? I would probably pick Bret versus Shawn, just because there's so much raw emotion to it. There's so much believability to it. There's so much authenticity to it. And you know, a lot of people will say, "Oh, that's a work shoot," or "That's this or that," or and give things like that a bad name. But to me, wrestling is at its best when the lines are blurred,
Yeah,
and when you don't understand. Kevin Sullivan would say the audience want to believe. You just have to give them this much of a reason to. And Bret and Shawn gave us this much of a reason to. And really, everything you see on the show should be designed to draw you into it and make you believe and make you. And Bret and Shawn, whether they did it intentionally or whether they did it just because things flew off the rails, and honestly, the answer is probably both. They did it in a way where if you read the Dave Meltzers and the Wade Kellers and the Mike Johnsons and you understood the politics and the backstage, there was an extra layer of understanding. But if you're 11-year-old me watching on his couch who doesn't own a computer, you still get what's going on. You still understand that the hatred and you may not get every single reference, or you may not get the meaning behind every single reference, but you understand what you're watching, and you understand these guys don't like each other. So, you know, Montreal happened. I was 11 years old, and to me, it blew my mind. It was the most shocking thing I had seen ever at that time. And again, I didn't understand what was happening that night, but like the next night, and then in the weeks following, I started to grasp it, and it was just it was so mind blowing to me, and I never really questioned it or thought anything about it until I heard a couple of different people. One was a local television wrestling pundit named Brian Krasman, and one was Steve Corino, who works for WWE NXT right now as a producer. They had both said at different points something to the effect of, "Oh yeah, the Montreal Screwjob, like that was real," or something like that. And I had never thought about that until I had heard that. That got my conspiracy theory gears turning. And unfortunately, over the past few years, I think the definition of what a conspiracy theorist is has changed for the worse in our culture, in our society. And unfortunately, there's a lot of just absolutely inane, just out of the blue, nonsensical, pull out of thin air type of crackpot things that people are coming up with. But excuse me, when I think about conspiracy theories, I think about things that you look at with some type of pragmatic evidence. Like, okay, was there a second gunman for JFK? Or is there a Bigfoot? Or how do they make crop circles? Or whatever the case is, there's an answer to these questions. And, we can debate them. And no, look at this footage right here. Well, look at this picture. Was this? Rather than just say, well, I heard from my best friend's brother's barber's milkman that, COVID vaccines cause you to grow a third eye and walk backwards. That's not the type of conspiracy theories that I subscribe to or I agree with. But I love the stuff that makes you think. And thinking about the Steve Carinos and thinking about the skeptics and watching Wrestling with Shadows and thinking about the fact everybody involved made more money than they ever imagined. Everybody got what they wanted out of the finish. What if? What if Brett was in on it? Is there a way for Brett to have been a willing participant and this makes sense? And this fit the timeline of events? And if so, when would he have been let in on it? Is it a last minute thing? Is it a long-term thing? And I don't tell the viewers the answer. I can't solve the riddle. I ask questions. And one thing I talk about in the feature is if this theory is correct, probably only two people know, and that's Vince and Brett. So just the fact we can raise those questions. I've had people come up to me at conventions and say, thank you so much for making that because I had never thought of it that way. And now I'm wondering. I've had people say, I think that you're absolutely right. I've had people say, I think you're full of crap. And I welcome all of those scenarios because I don't necessarily subscribe to one side or the other. I just want to ask questions. And there's a moral in there that you can use in everyday life, and that's ask questions and gain knowledge. Don't just make assumptions. Don't just believe what's going on in face value, because everybody in this world has an agenda. And the fact that, again, time period, topic, all that came together. That was my first release that I put my own money into, my own elbow grease into, and it was a big risk. But it was a huge success, and it paved the way for, the Legend of Virgil and Finding Zach Gowen and everything I've done with Les Thatcher with the Heartland Library and the Brian Pillman Memorial shows and, everything we put out, Refereeing 101 with Jimmy Corderas. If Montreal had not been a success, I probably would have been one and done, but I'm still producing content to this day. I've got to run off more discs for my trip this weekend. I have to rebuild my digital store, ProWrestlingLibrary.com, because Pivot Share is shutting down. So the fact that it started at, making one DVD and can you help me book talent for this live event? And can you do this and do that? To now, fast forward to now, I have over 500 hours of content in my library, and it's still going to grow. Very thankful for that, and I'm very thankful for the people out there listening, because support of folks like them have enabled me to continue doing this and hopefully keep churning out more content that they're going to be attracted to.
Amen to that. Keep going as well, because it is a fascinating documentary. It is. It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, when you was doing that, was it pulling you one way or the other while you were doing it as well, or did you try and remain neutral?
I think my opinion changed depending on what chapter I was in. It on one hand, you look at it and you think to yourself, this is way too complex. This is way too complicated. There's no way this could have been orchestrated like this. Sometimes things just happen. And I could 10 minutes later say, well, Brett grew up in this business. He couldn't have been that naive to not see this coming. It's both sides of the coin. And, ultimately, I think it's more than likely that if there was some sort of conspiracy, it would have come out by now. But then again, you never know, because so much has happened since then, and there's been so much bad blood and so much negativity. And, if you're Brett or Vince, unfortunately, that's not the story anymore, because Brett's had so many hardships with his family and his health. And, I think if there ever was a plan to do anything with it, it unfortunately just got lost and buried in all of the life troubles that came out in the years afterwards, which is you know, obviously my heart goes out to that whole family and how much tragedy that they've undergone.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Amen to
I,
that.
I think it's going to go down in history as one of the great what ifs and maybe the best, most entertaining a roller coaster story to watch. Where, the fact that we're speculating and guessing 26 years later, and we're still talking about 26 years later. Um, when I was a kid, there wasn't many people talking about things from 1970, but now we're still talking about so much from that era. It shows you what a lasting effect it's had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well on that, I mean, I don't know if you would agree with this, but do you think that if there was something like you alluded to there that could help bring that full circle and potentially get that rounded off, do you think that the unfortunate events that happened when Brett went to WCW played a factor? Obviously, the injuries, the concussion as well, and then when WCW sort of fell and Brett came away from that and didn't come back to sort of WWE. Do you think that sort of played a factor in it? His WCW run would have potentially hindered the Montreal Screwjob coming back.
Without a doubt, I think you could make a very real case for saying, Brett, I can't afford you. Go make your money for 3 years and we'll come back and do business together. And Brett spent so long saying he would never go back and he would never use Montreal as a story. And his fans would say, oh, Brett would never use it as a story. But people have to remember they did. In 2010, when he came back,
Yes.
they did it.
Yes. I was going to say exactly the same thing. You beat me to it,
Yeah.
Joe.
And it obviously wasn't what it could have been. I don't think
No.
it was a good match.
No.
But for the moment and what it represented, it was cool to see. But just imagine if you could have done that with a healthy Brett
Oh, yeah.
in 2002
Yeah.
instead of 2010. You've
Yeah.
got an entirely different situation. What if instead of, you know, Vince and Hulk in 03, it's Vince and Brett, like there's
Yeah.
so much what if to it. But um, without question, I think if not for Brett's injuries, if not for unfortunately what happened with his brother,
Yeah.
um, I think Brett would have been back in the fold a lot sooner. And it would have been, again, one of those moments in time that stands forever.
Oh, it would have been blockbuster without a shadow of a doubt. Joe, we could wax lyrical about anything and everything to do with the history of wrestling and modern day wrestling as well. Just very quickly, do you think being a wrestling fan now is much more lucrative and better, and there is more availability to the next generation of wrestling fans now? Or do you think it was better? Do you think we're being oversaturated now? And do you think it was better when there was maybe just the one, two, or three promotions in the late 90s that we could dip in? What's your thoughts? Because obviously you've been in it from, being a fan from then till now. Do you think it's better or worse now being a wrestling fan currently?
I think it's one of, if not the best time to be. I'm not going to say the best time because there's pros and cons to everything. I think social media has a tendency to make things a lot less fun. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
it's a lot more difficult to have surprises,
Yes.
and oversaturation is a key point. Um, I think the one thing this generation is missing is anticipation. Um, when you watched wrestling on a Monday night and you got through with that adrenaline rush and it was 11:05 p.m. and unless you recorded it, you had no way to watch anything until the weekend shows. You had to wait 5 days and maybe hope that you'd see exclusive footage on the weekend shows or whatever the case was. Um, you know, going to a store and looking for a certain tape or I didn't really do trading, but I had friends that did tape trading where you'd find some fourth generation copy of a Japanese match you really wanted to see. And, you trade away for it. You check the mail every single day, every single day. You don't feel the same accomplishment when you just press a button and you can get anything.
Yeah.
It's great that it's accessible. And it's great that it's affordable. I could show you how many ads from when I was a kid. Brand new VHS, over 2 hours of action for only $59.95. What?
Yeah, I know.
And now you get the entire history of the business practically for what? $5 a month?
Yeah,
Come on.
That's it.
So one thing I do love about social media, and one thing I do love about what we're in here and now, because I don't want to be totally negative because it's pro and con, but it's easy for you to find your flavor of ice cream.
Yes.
We talked about there was something for everybody back in the day. It's still the case now. You want your lucha, you want your death match, you want your British style, you want your, glitz and glamour and entertainment, you want your comedy. Cool. You can get all that. And it's easier to find. It's easier to locate. You can go to New Japan World. You can go to MLW's YouTube. You can go to a number of different streaming platforms that have all these independent shows on it. And the talent have so much more of an avenue to market themselves and monetize themselves, whether it be Patreon, whether it be Twitch, whether it be their homemade merchandise stores or Pro Wrestling Tees or Cameo, anything like that. When I broke in, there were not any of those revenue streams. For me, doing ProWrestlingLibrary.com and having content on Fight and High Spots and Premiere and all of the stuff out there, that was a pipe dream back in the day. That wasn't really heard of. I mean, fast forward to my time in Ring of Honor, internet pay-per-view was just in its infancy, and we were just figuring it out. And now every promotion practically is doing it every week. It's wild. Yeah. So in terms of being able to do that guerrilla marketing and put yourself out there, nothing compares to the opportunities and the potential for revenue these days. Nothing compares to being able to find the product you like, being able to sample everybody than today. I just hope that the fans don't overwhelm themselves, and I hope that the talent doesn't overlook that, okay, style matters. I get you want your gifts and you want your viral moments, and that's part of marketing, but you got to have the substance behind it. Yeah. If I watch you in an 8-second clip and I'm captivated and I want to know more, and I sit down and actually decide to invest my time and watch a 15-minute match, you better grab me. 100%. Because if that 8 seconds was the only cool thing you did, I'm probably not coming back.
Yeah,
100%. So media is always changing. The world's always changing. The world's a lot smaller and a lot faster than it was when I was a kid, let alone some of, my predecessors. So you have to be cognizant of that when you're producing content or you're, selling content or just involved in any way. So as long as you keep changing with the times, evolving, and kind of keep your finger on the pulse of that audience and serve as many masters as you can, because it's not just about the 50-year-old wrestling purist, and it's not just about the 17-year-old on TikTok. You got to try to get everybody. If you can do that, then you're in a good place.
That's it. And I think, like you say, you just captured it. I think towards the end there, as long as you're generating some heat or you're generating some cheers, you're generating, and you just can't stay lukewarm, or even worse, completely ice cold. So yeah, great advice as well. And I agree with you. It's okay. Some wrestlers doing these vlogs and things like that, if they're entertaining, great. like you say, if I'm not getting excited by what you're supposed to be doing, why am I going to tune into anything else that you're doing? You know, it's
Another important thing that comes with that too, with folks that do vlogs and stuff like that, that I notice a lot, is there's a disconnect between what they're selling in the vlog and what they're selling in the ring.
yeah,
And as Jeff Jarrett would say, you confuse them, you lose them. And
yes,
if you're in the ring and you're this psychotic, bloodthirsty killer, but if you're out of the ring and you're volunteering at the orphanage and you're reading to the old ladies and you're walking them across the street, and we have in-depth footage of you planting your flower garden and all that stuff. That's all fine and well if that's what you're into, and that's all fine and well if that's what you want to market, but it's very difficult to have it both ways. And if I'm paying for one version of you on Patreon, and I'm paying for a completely different version of you on when I buy a ticket, what am I getting? What am I paying for here? Like, if you buy a ticket to see a movie, you're not going to get a scene where the actor slashes a bunch of victims, and then the next one where he's repenting at church the next day.
yeah.
You're not going to. There has to be a narrative to follow. There has to be something you're marketing to, because if you're all over the place, you're not sending a clear message. And I think in the attempt at being real and at the attempt at being personable, sometimes people lose that aura as far as, I'm a product that I'm supposed to be selling, but what is that product and what do I want my audience to feel? I think if people can not BS their audience and, not have to sacrifice one for the other, but how do you bridge the two where you've got a congruent product that makes sense? It would be like if I cut a promo on you and I said, tonight I'm going to take this chair, bash it over your skull, I'm going to split you ear to ear and watch you bleed out in front of me. And then we get to the ring, the bell rings, and I grab a headlock. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got to tell me the same story for A and B. And if there's a disconnect there, then maybe I'm only going to give you half as much money supporting one or the other instead of the whole package.
And I agree with you. And you know what? There's no harm in holding the real you back as well when you're selling a product.
No.
Joe, we've got a minute left, my friend. The floor is yours. I really, honestly appreciate your time. It's been absolutely fascinating. Cannot wait to get the feedback when this content goes out. You've got less than a minute, my friend. Please plug all your socials and where people can find you and what you're doing. Shoot.
My website is joe-dombrowski.com. That's where all my DVDs are. ProWrestlingLibrary.com is the digital store. We're rebuilding that because Pivot Share is shut down. So keep checking back. We'll be re-adding new content every single week throughout September, October, and probably beyond that as well. At Joe_Dombrowski on Twitter, at Joseph_Dombrowski on the Instagram. And to be continued. We'll see what's next for me, but I'm all over the place, and I appreciate the time and platform to be here today.
No worries, Joe. It'd be a pleasure to catch up as well, man, in the months to come to see what has changed since this interview. Joe Dombrowski, God bless you, my friend. Thank you for being on Wrestling with Faith.
Thank you.
Take care, brother. All the very best.